Hello everyone, my name is Jespresso and I'm back today to talk about more Throne of Eldraine spoilers. So today we are going to be looking at the color blue. Now before I get started, I want to give a preface about how I do these videos. The way I do them is by color. As the spoilers come out, I will do one color at a time. I started with white, now we're going into blue, and we will steadily work down the color pie. Once that is all done, I will talk about multicolor spells, including artifacts, and then at the end of it, I will wrap everything up and talk about the rest, the cards that were not spoiled by the time that I had a chance to talk about them in my videos. So with all that being said, let's get underway with Brazen Borrower. Brazen Borrower is a creature, and it is a creature with an adventure. So first I'm going to talk about the adventure, okay? The adventure is called Petty Theft. It is one generic and one blue for an instant. It says return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. If you do not know how adventures work, the basic idea is this. You can cast a creature with adventure on it for its adventure cost, then that creature goes into exile. You get the effect of the adventure, and then at any point after you may cast the creature portion when that card is legal to be played. Seems simple? So for Petty Theft, you return the non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. It's an okay effect, but what makes it really good is the fact that Brazen Borrower on its own is a one generic, double blue, fairy rogue with flash and flying. And it can only block creatures with flying, but that doesn't matter because this card is so much more flexible than any of the other adventure cards that we've seen. The ability to use the instant speed adventure at any time, and then at any time after that you can flash out this fairy because it's in exile, is stupidly good. You will be able to have a beat stick of a monster with flying, so it's got evasion, on turn 3 or later. But the reason why that's so good is because in control style decks, being able to play at instant speed is very powerful. It limits what your opponent's able to do because you're able to hold up counterspells and answers, while at the same time you can hold up things like Brazen Borrower. Brazen Borrower now is a counterspell answer, like it returns a minion, and at the same time it makes a minion, so it's a 2-for-1 card. The idea of having that much amount of value with also a way to threaten your opponent by removing their board and then chipping away with this 3-1 seems really good. This card is easily standard playable and modern playable. I don't know if it fits into a deck, that is the one thing, but it's so flexible that you have to imagine it does. Like it could fit into most things, right? So Brazen Borrower, really good card. From there, let's talk about Emery, Lurker of the Loch. Emery, Lurker of the Loch is 2 generic mana and a blue. It's a legendary creature, Merfolk Wizard, and is a 1/2. It has the ability that this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Then, when it enters the battlefield, you put the top 4 cards of your library into the graveyard. Then you can tap it and choose target artifact in your graveyard, and you may cast that card this turn. So here's the deal. This card, I think, is a lot better than it seems, right? Mana reduction on cards is always very strong. It also is doing this thing where we'll see more cards later, but it seems like it's working into a new deck archetype where you mill both yourself and your opponent. And the whole idea is that you have these cards in your graveyard, creatures specifically, that you are resurrecting with Cauldron of Eternity, which is the black-themed artifact of this set. This deck seems really strong. It seems like it's getting a lot of support. Emery, I believe, is going to be a very critical part of that deck because it allows you to play your Cauldron while also milling yourself. So the idea is you mill yourself for your great creatures that you want in your bin. Something big, I don't know. Then you also put the Cauldron in there. Now with Emery, you can get that Cauldron back, and it costs less too because you already have creatures in your graveyard that you put there with cards like Emery, right? There's a lot of cards that we'll see as we go along that have more synergy with this. We already have cards that do self-mill so easily, like Doom Whisperer, that are already insanely powerful cards, right? So the fact that there is a self-mill deck that's going on that is also bringing back these big creatures like Doom Whisperer seems strong. I don't know if the entire build of the deck will be viable in Standard, but there are a lot more cards that fit into this archetype that seems to be very pushed by WotC, right? So our next card that we're going to look at is Fae of Wishes. Fae of Wishes is 1 generic and a blue and is a fairy wizard. On its own, It is a 1/4 with flying, and it has 1 generic and a blue, discard 2 cards, return Fave Wishes to its owner's hand. Weird. But it's got an adventure, and the adventure is called Granted. It is 3 generic and a blue. For sorcery, it's an adventure. You may choose a non-creature card you own from outside the game and put it into your hand. So the kind of idea of this card is you play Granted, you get a card in your hand, right? So now you are 1 card up because now you can play Fate of Wishes, right? Then at some point later on, you can discard 2 cards and return Fate of Wishes to its owner's hand to recast Granted and then Fate of Wishes. So you can just keep making wishes is the idea, if you have the cards to do it. It seems really slow and clunky to me. I don't know if it's actually going to fit in any sort of archetype, but here's what I would say. These wish type of cards have always been one of those types of cards that are just so powerful. When they hit the battlefield, they tend to hit hard. They tend to be format warping, right? Like, if it's too good, it can really be too good, because now you can add things from completely different sets into a format that it would otherwise break, right? So Fate of Wishes on its own does not seem powerful to me. It seems very clunky, but there might be a combo with it just because of that whole Granted mechanic that I can't see, because the entire history of Magic is open to this 1 card, right? We'll have to see. I don't think it'll be great. Could be really, really good. So I guess the ceiling and the floor for this card are both very far apart. Next card we are talking about today is Folio of Fancies. It is 1 generic and a blue, and it is an artifact. The ability of this artifact says that players have no maximum hand size. Players, not just you. And then it says pay double X and tap it, and each player draws X cards. Okay. And then it says pay 2 generic and a blue, and each opponent puts a number of cards equal to the number of cards in their hand from the top of their library into their graveyard. Here's what I'm talking about. There's a lot of these cards that we're seeing right now that mill both players, right? And they also draw cards for both players, which in turn mills cards for both players. I don't think this is going to make the cut in the standard version of the deck, just because giving your opponent no maximum hand size and having to sink so much into it for it to even be halfway decent doesn't seem great. But I suppose you could always pay the 3 mana ability. If your opponent has 4 cards in hand, well, you milled them for 4. Is that good? Well, no. It doesn't seem particularly strong. This definitely seems to be more of a commander card, right? Like, I'm sure there's some wacky combo. If you have infinite mana, you can mill everyone, because X and X, right? It's not too hard to get infinite mana in Commander. So if you're into that, for 2 mana plus the book and then tap, you can just mill everyone. That's a pretty easy way to kill the table, because everyone's going to draw their last card or the card they don't have before you, so you'll kill the table after you pass your turn. I don't know, probably like $1 rare. The next card we have is Gatwick the Wizened. It costs X and triple blue. It's a legendary creature human wizard for 3/3. Okay. When it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards, so it's got that X on the blue, right? And then it also has the ability of whenever you cast a blue spell, you tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Here's how I look at this. This is basically a blue sun zenith on a creature, right? And for me, that's not good. That's not quality, because a lot of times in these blue decks, you want the spell. Spells in blue decks are so much better than creatures in blue decks, right? Like, generally speaking, unless you're playing Murlocs or something like that, spells are going to trump your creatures. It's just because there's not a whole lot that a 3/3 is doing for you in blue, right? Tapping a non-land permanent opponent controls is, because they untap it on their turn, so it's theoretically happening on your turn. I guess you could cast an instant to tap a creature down. It feels like a worse version of a Zombie Lady of Scrolls and Arcanus the Omnipotent. Arcanus has a way to protect itself, and a zombie has a way to draw way more cards than Gatwick, right? I don't think it's good. I think it's actually a pretty mediocre card. There are already so many cards that out-compete it, right? So, next card we're looking at today is Midnight Clock. Midnight Clock costs 2 colorless and a blue. It's an artifact, so 3 mana for an artifact, and it says tap it to add a blue. Okay, so it's a mana rock. It also has a couple more effects, so you can pay 2 generic and a blue and put an hour counter on Midnight Clock, and then at the beginning of each upkeep, you put an hour counter on it as well. Then, when the 12th hour counter is put on midnight clock, you shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, and then you draw 7 cards, and then you exile it. So, this is interesting, right? Because 3 mana for a mana rock that taps for 1 color is worse than most mana rocks. A lot of mana rocks you can play for 2 mana, and they'll give you that effect, or they'll tap for anything. But it also has that whole hour counter thing. Now, the thing I would keep an eye out for is this card is better than it seems, because it says at the beginning of each upkeep, right? So if you play Commander, that's 3 turns and then the clock strikes midnight. When that happens, you just draw 7 cards. So it's like a mana rock in mono blue that just also has the potential upside to just draw you a new hand. That's pretty good. Like, that's actually not anything to laugh at, because you already want to run mana rocks in blue. This one adds a specific blue mana to your mana pool, so that's good. And that also just has a really high upside. So you have a little bit of a lower downside, but then you just have this possibility of just this draw 7 cards. It seems pretty good. I actually think this will make it into a lot of mono blue commander decks. Next card we have today is Mirrormade. It is 1 generic, double blue for an enchantment. And it says you may have Mirrormade enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. So that is something, alright. So here's the deal. Mono blue, blue in general, has so many ways of copying creatures and just cards that your opponents control, but mostly creatures, right? Mirrormade gets you that artifact enchantment clause. So this card right here is very reminiscent of cards like Clever Impersonator. Clever Impersonator, when it enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield, right? You also have cards like Phyrexian Metamorph, and Phyrexian Metamorph enters as an artifact or a creature, right? This one, for 1 mana less, enters as any artifact or enchantment. That is really strong. A lot of times in Commander, the best thing to copy is an artifact or enchantment. You copy your opponent's doubling season, right? You copy their doubling cube. You copy some bullshit card that they have, Eldrazi Monument, right? There are so many good targets for that type of stuff because artifacts and enchantments tend to stick around longer. Good artifacts and enchantments tend to be like auto-includes in decks, right? Mirrormade is now a 1 mana less Clever Impersonator that does that same effect. Redundancy like that is really strong. This card seems really good. Next card that we're looking at today is the Magic Mirror. So it is 6 generic and triple blue. It's the legendary artifact for the blue realm and throne of Eldraine. And it costs 1 less for each instant sorcerer in your graveyard. It says you have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror. Then you draw a card for each knowledge counter on the Magic Mirror. So let's unpack that. These cards, these artifacts, all have a way for them to cost less mana. That is a very big deal because cheating out mana cost is incredibly powerful, right? If this card just didn't have the top effect and said you have no maximum hand size and then it draws you the cards for 9 mana, it would be unplayable. The fact is, it's not too hard to have like 5 instants, or even like 4. Let's say 4. It's not hard to have 4 instants and sorceries in your graveyard, in an instant and sorcery graveyard deck. Like, that is pretty easy to do. And if you get more, this costs 3 mana. And then you get this effect. Now, the trouble is you don't get to choose to draw the cards. You have to draw the cards. I don't see that as a problem, though, because you have no maximum hand size. And if you draw your deck in Magic, you just win the game. Because if you have 40 options of what to do during your turn and you never miss a land drop and your opponents have 2 cards in hand, you have so much more advantage than them, right? I think it's actually really strong. I don't know how strong it will be, but it definitely is one of those cards that in the deck that wants it, it's gonna be there. So there you go. The next card that we have today is called Vantress Gargoyle, 1 generic and a blue. It's an artifact creature, gargoyle. Who would have thunk? It has flying and it is a 5/4, but wait! There's downside. It can't attack unless defending player has 7 or more cards in their graveyard. Aww. And it can't block unless you have 4 more cards in hand. It also has the ability that you can put the top card of your library, or each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Here's the deal though. This card is a lot better than it seems, I believe. And I'll bank on that because you pay 2 mana to put this card down. If you were playing a control deck, guess what? You already have 4 more cards in hand. So you have a 5/4 with flying with Defender, right? That is not bad. In a control deck that's trying to stall out the game and also fill up your graveyards, that's really good. You play it, you block, and then you tap the effect to get your, Empress of the Lock and your Cauldron of Eternity combo off. So it's just kind of like, it stalls out the game so well because it's so much better than any other card or creature you could play on curve, right? Like any other creature for 2 mana, it does not beat a 5/4 flying. And then at the end of the game, when you draw through your deck, now it's a 5/4 flying that can attack because you've been milling out your opponent the whole game, right? That just wins the game. And the fact that it's your 2-drop that works great in the early game and works great in the late game and synergizes with your deck strategy, I think this card is going to see a lot of play. So with that, we have covered all the blue cards today. I will be moving on to black. So until the next video, my name is Jespresso, and I thank you ever so kindly for watching my videos. Until then, bye-bye. Jespresso.